Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters, viewers and friends of Ikra TV. Welcome to another edition of Real Talk. I'm your host, Iqbal Bana. As I said last week, today we are hoping to talk about a very important issue that affects all our lives, day in, day out, and that is about hate crime. And I have today very eminent guests with me, one of whom doesn't know this, but I met her over 30 years ago when we both attended the Local Authorities Against Apartheid conference, the biennial conference in Glasgow. She was a young firebrand councillor then, and she's a young firebrand PCC at the moment, has been at the forefront of fighting against injustice across all strands, but particularly around race. She has been on my program before, and I'm sure you remember her. She is now the PCC, the Police and Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire, a position that holds an incredible amount of importance and significance when it comes to policing our communities in West Yorkshire. And similarly, there are PCCs around the country who also have the same important roles that they play. So she will give us a flavour of the role of the PCC and how that influences policing in our communities. I also have the privilege of having Paul Giannassi, who is the NPCC's Hate Crime Coordinator. The NPCC is the National Police Chiefs Council. Every county has a Chief Constable, and there's 42 or 43, Paul will correct me, right, the Chief Constables, and they have a body which is called the National Police Chiefs Council, and Paul is again the Hate Crime Coordinator for that. I've known Paul for about 25 years as well. He still looks the same as when I first got to know him, and Alison's not changed at all since the 30 odd years that I first saw her. But you know, over the years I've changed quite a bit. I'm looking much older and much frailer and less intelligent than I was before. So can I welcome my two guests? Paul, Alison, welcome onto Ikra TV. Welcome to Real Talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us in my studio. Obviously, as I said, you know, I don't know whether you remember this or not.
I do.
Many years ago that when we were both part of you were a councillor, a young councillor, just been appointed at that time, and I used to work in local government. And we attended this conference called the Local Authorities Against Apartheid. And I'm not sure whether you were there when Nelson Mandela came. I think one of your other colleagues
in Leeds.
Attended.
I was there in Leeds when he came.
But not in Glasgow. Yes,
No,
you were there in Leeds, but obviously, but they're not in Glasgow because that's where he first came. But yeah, I mean, you know, there's a long history of working against apartheid and racism. So welcome to the show, and we'll talk about your role in a while. Paul, thank you for joining us. Last time we did a program with you on hate crime from Belgium when you were there attending a conference online. So thank you for coming. Paul's come all the way from Stoke to join us today to talk to us about where we are on hate crime across the country and what the agencies, both the agencies, are doing, but in terms of the PCCs and the Police Chiefs Council as well. So can I say, obviously the Home Office released some figures a couple of weeks ago to tell us what the latest information was. Over the last few years, obviously, we've seen an increase in hate crime. Admittedly, from the figures that we've got at the moment, it shows very clearly that hate crime around sexual orientation, transgender hate crime, etc., has really gone up. While at the same time, hate crime around race has also gone up, but not to the same extent as it has in the past. Now, a lot of people will say that there's underreporting, as you know, we know that. Do we still have the same issue about underreporting in transgender hate crime and sexual orientation, or is that still sort of, disability has gone up as well, quite a bit?
So we know that all crime gets underreported. I mean, very few crimes are reported at every crime. But we know that hate crime traditionally has been a greater gap. So when we came together in 2007, when we started working, the closing of the gap between people's experience of hate crime and recorded hate crime was seen as our biggest challenge. And in that instance, performance has been really good. So from 2009, when the data first came in, the government has a survey called the Crime Survey of England and Wales, which knocks on people's doors, goes to 45,000 households, and asks questions about their experience of hate crime. And obviously we've got the police recorded hate crime data. So we've effectively, over a 10-year period, from 2009 to 2019, gone from 1 in 6 hate crimes that the survey says takes place to 1 in 2 being recorded by the police. So phenomenal progress down to relationships with civil society groups, kind of confidence in the communities coming forward, and better police systems and better police training. So in that respect, the people's experience of hate crime has gone down, of physical hate crime, and recording has gone up. But when we go to communities and talk about that, most will say, well, you're talking nonsense, because they experience more hate and they experience more hostility. But the emergence of online hate and people being more exposed to hate, the kind of divisions that have occurred in politics, in society, have got broader and sharper and more in people's faces. So in 2005, 2006, you could easily find really horrific racist material online fairly easily, but it wasn't coming at you, whereas the social media element and the Web 2.0 meant that what we were seeing in these dark and seedy corners of the internet was suddenly on the comments page to a newspaper or on social media. So people's experience of hate is greater. And finally, if I could just say that it isn't consistent. So the groups tend to be more isolated from in society, tend to experience and report less. So it isn't consistent across the
I mean, obviously we've seen over the last few years, as you say, a huge increase in online hate crime.
Yeah.
Right, which is sort of, to a lot of people, particularly the elderly, that's abstract to a certain extent.
Cool.
Because they're much more into, what's happened to them on a one-to-one level, a personal level. So they see that, because they're not sort of like me, IT friendly or savvy to a certain extent. They witness all that. Or they're not on social media like I am. I'm not on social media, so I don't see some of that. But when it comes to personal interaction, how much of the increase has been around people-to-people hate? Do we have this information on that?
So there's fairly reliable statistics that's dropped significantly.
Has it?
So it may not for every person in every community and people in different circumstances. People who live, somebody who works as a doctor who lives in a private estate up a long drive and works in a hospital is probably less likely to be subject to hate crime than somebody who drives a taxi and picks up drunken people on a Friday night and takes them home.
Yeah.
So circumstances play a significant part in this. But generally speaking, the survey says, with reliable statisticians who are much more qualified than me, given a kind of reliability because of the size of it, that people's experience is less than it was in 2009. And there is some backup evidence to say that that's how it is. But the people's exposure and individual people's experiences may be very different than that, of course. So it still remains a significant issue. But even if somebody isn't on social media, the fact that there was websites that were set up by members of the Ku Klux Klan, which claimed to be the longest running websites in existence, and they're probably not far wrong. They've been shoved off a couple of times, but they've come back. But we had to work really hard to get in there to see what they were saying and what they were encouraging and what they were inciting people to do. So they weren't welcoming to people. But what the kind of Web 2.0 did is allowed people to cut and paste it and put it on the comments sections of people's newspapers. So people read a newspaper article about the building of a new mosque or a gypsy traveller site or a trans issue or something like that. And suddenly these comments were being cut and pasted and put there. So even if you're not an average social media user, if you haven't got a presence, you're still going to be exposed to it. And the rise of kind of divisions in society around politics issues, whether they be national politics, local politics or global politics, people are using more and more extreme language which targets populism, breeds
communities and
kind of
we've seen that in Leicester to a certain extent. We'll come back to that. But Alison, your role, can you just give a little flavour to our audience what a PCC, Police and Crime Commissioner? I know you've been here before. You probably you explained it, but maybe it's been quite a while. It's been over 2.5 years. So they might have memories like mine,
No, I think it was about 9 months ago I was here.
Oh, sorry, because
I made such an impact.
No, because I remember. So before that, we did a program on hate crime.
Oh yeah.
Before COVID, yes.
Yeah.
So go on.
So technically I'm the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and there isn't a PCC, and if there is, it's the Mayor, but she delegates 95% of the function to me.
For my purposes, you are the PCC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I do everything that a PCC does except three things. I cannot hire or fire the Chief Constable, which I have to say is a very good thing because it means that John and I have a really constructive, positive relationship. I cannot write the police and crime plan, although I can contribute to it, of course, and I cannot set the precept. But again, I can be part of convincing the police and crime panel that the precept that we're trying to get them to agree to is the right one. But everything else...
The precept is the amount of
council tax that we ask the public.
The citizens pay.
Yeah, so last year it was £10 on a Band D property, and we'll be going back to the Police and Crime Panel in February to seek a further increase.
Right.
And so my role is to hold the police and the Chief Constable to account for delivery of the Mayor's Police and Crime Plan, which was co-produced with the people of West Yorkshire through the Tell Tracy consultation process. And we have regular meetings with the Chief Constable, some of them online, so the Community Outcomes meeting is live streamed. We had one last week in Wakefield. We also work with policing to ensure that there's proper coordination of what the police is doing and what the members of the public understand the police are doing. So we're there to engage with the public, to tell them what the police are doing, to give them that understanding. We hold the police budget, so the Mayor has to sign off, for example, the refurbishment of Trafalgar House that she's just signed off. All that is within the Mayor's gift. We're responsible for partnerships, so crime partnerships. The reason it's police and crime is because it's not just about the police, it's about those other criminal justice partners. So I chair the local criminal justice board, which brings together Crown Prosecution Service, Youth Justice Board, HMCTS, the Crown Court Service, for example. Barristers can come to that meeting. Anybody involved in the criminal justice system, victim support, third sector organisation. And then I've also got a national role, so I'm part of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, and in that national role I'm responsible for equality, diversity and human rights, and I'm also the lead for race disparities, and I'm the deputy lead for transparency and integrity. So all those three things marry together very nicely.
How do you fit all that into a day then? That's a huge agenda to cover.
Yeah, so I don't cover it in a day. So it's my role for the whole of my term of office, which obviously aligns with the Mayor's term of office, 3 years. We're back up in 2024. And so I have to raise awareness of all the police and crime commissioners and deputy mayors nationally of EDHR, of race disparities. We give them training, we give them data, we share good practice across the 43 police forces so that they know who's doing things well. But we also have to bring challenge to our forces and chief constables, so we tell them where that's happened and how they can follow the route map that somebody else has already set. So we do lots of things.
In this role, obviously, I mean, you have a county which has got a very large minority ethnic population.
Yeah, brilliant. I love West Yorkshire.
You've got big cities like Leeds and Bradford, for example.
Yeah. Kirklees, where I live.
Kirklees, yeah. And then surrounded by Calderdale, which is Halifax. So you have a very large constituency. Yeah. I mean, West Yorkshire, or Yorkshire has got the largest county population in the country. It's the largest region in the country. Now, obviously, that region requires different thinking and different policing. Yeah. So people like you can add that other value that we need in order to make sure that policing, the policing service delivers. Now, one of the key issues is over the past 20 years or so, we've seen that the trust and confidence within the police service or towards the police service has dropped considerably. And I mean, I remember in my days when I was on the Home Secretary's Stephen Lawrence group, that was one of the big issues at that time. Do you feel that that has changed, or is it still, because there's low esteem or low trust and confidence in the policing service even now, although some of it is related to other criminal issues. Do you still feel that when you go out into the communities that you still have a sort of a mountain to climb in a way to win that trust and confidence, or make people feel that the police are there to support them or not?
So the good news is that I'm not the police, so I don't have a personal mountain to climb. I am black. Yeah. I have faced racism. I faced it recently, and I've also lived in Chapeltown for many years. I've lived in Armley, where we have 20+% of the community Southeast Asian background. So I've lived amongst
you have the real experience.
I've lived the real experience, and people trust me and my lived experience because, you know, I'm not going to collude.
But like you, I mean, I've been working around race hate.
Yeah.
And campaigning for social justice and equality for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
But I still feel now we're going backwards.
Oh yeah,
right? So regardless of what you and I have been fighting for.
Yeah. So to finish the point, so I personally feel that I've got great interaction with black communities. They trust me because I tell them the truth. I don't try and pretend that their lived experience is not real. But I do believe that the relationship with the police is one of the worst that it's been for a long time. I don't think that trust and confidence in the black community has ever been great. I think that older black people, like my dad, had a great deal of trust for police. Younger people, much less so. And if you look at the history of police and black communities, the evidence base for that mistrust is very much there. So I think that people have now got access, as you said, to social media, they're watching the news, they see what happens on their streets, stop and search, 7 times more likely if you're a black person in the country. In West Yorkshire, it's 3.2 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you live in West Yorkshire. So the evidence tells us that policing still is not fair and equal, and that's why trust and confidence is low.
Bearing all that in mind, Paul, obviously your task is to gather the data, the information, and present it to people like Alison and her other colleagues, as well as the chief constables. How important is that information? How important does that information play in policing policy? And I know. I mean, Mark Hamilton, who is the lead for the NPCC on hate crime, he's been around for the last 4 or 5 years that I've deeply committed to it. But I mean, in terms of actual delivery at the front end, how much of difference has that made? Because the College of Policing, produces the guides, for example, or the template for how police operate. But that has been challenged in the last few years, hasn't it? Particularly after the Hull case, etc., where a police officer complained or challenged a decision made by a ruling because under the issue about freedom of information. So police are under pressure from the community to up their game, and then on the other side you've got pressure coming from the other side, which is trying to, and the politics recently, for example, by the Home Secretary, the former Home Secretary.
Which one?
Well, both former Home Secretaries had made it very clear that as far as they were concerned, they did not see equality and diversity as one of their key priorities. How do you balance all that stuff together?
So for me, I joined the police in the miners' strike in 1984 and left in 2014. I joined a police force, as it described itself, and left a police service, as it described itself. And that cultural change that I've seen during my career, where it's about serving communities, it was very different than what I was told. I was told when I come in, I was trained to be in charge. I was trained to be in control, and you protect people by keeping society in its place. Whereas obviously it's very different if you're trying to offer a service. And for me, the fundamental of policing is we're a human rights organisation, and equality for me isn't about doing the same thing for different people. It's about outcomes, and if it's safe for me to walk from my house to the petrol station at 10 o'clock at night, it should be safe for Alison, it should be safe for you, it should be safe for a transgender person. So you have to do more for the people who need more to achieve that same standard of safety. And I think police has been tested in recent years from a whole bunch of fronts. You talk about legal challenge, you talk about political challenge, and there's been tests from all fronts. And I started off talking about a really positive situation where we'd increased reporting of hate crimes that have taken place and reduced the physical risk. But within that, there is still deep failings. So victims are significantly less likely to be satisfied with the police response when they're a victim of hate crime compared to a crime in general. So there is still real challenges for us. We know that victims are more likely to be repeat victims when they're subject to hate crime compared to crime in general. And we know that hate crime victims are 3 to 4 times more likely to suffer serious psychological harm when they're subject to crime than a similar crime. So we know we've got those challenges. So the confidence issue is really important, and I work all over the world involved in hate crime responses globally. And to put just one statistic forward, the Met Police in London records more hate crime than any country in the world. So the whole of America records 1/3 of the number of hate crimes than the Met Police record. Now, you either accept that London is a much more racist place than America, or you recognise, as I would argue, that the progress since the tragic murder of Stephen Lawrence in 1993 and the inquiry in 1999 has made significant changes. So you know that we do dip sampling of responses, and what we tend to find is that the service that's been offered has been well received by most victims. But when we get it wrong, we get it horribly wrong. In the case of the tragic response to Stephen Lawrence's tragic murder, we are still suffering for it now. And my son, who's a mid-ranking police officer with 16 years service in, was 7 when Stephen was murdered. So the kind of his ability to deliver fair services is damaged because of us getting it so horribly wrong. So we can't afford to get it wrong, and we can't afford one person to tell their friends that the police were hostile or rude or arrogant or dismissive. So it is obviously harder to close all them things down because of the knock-on feeling it affects in communities. We've got to work harder to work with communities with the resources we have, which aren't as strong and aren't as deep as they were.
And resources are being constrained even further and further, aren't they? I mean, can I just reiterate what Paul has said, and that is that I've been involved with hate crime for quite a while, and I've worked very closely with Paul over a number of years now. And I totally can assure you that as far as I'm aware, and from everything that we've heard around the world, there is no doubt that although we do have issues and problems that we need to tackle within our own community, when you compare that with what is happening across the rest of the world, we are far, far better off in terms of how we monitor, record and deal with hate crime in the United Kingdom, as opposed to, as Paul says, many, many other even highly developed countries such as the United States. Because as he said, that the United States is a massive population of 250 million, 300 million.
360, I think it is.
360, is it? 360 million. And they record less hate crime in the UK, in the United States, compared to one of our police services, which is the Metropolitan Police. So it shows how advanced and sophisticated our systems are, although, as Paul says, that it still requires a lot of improvement. So in that sense, we have done quite well since the dreadful murder of Stephen Lawrence. As you know, this program, we do have people ringing in, and if you want to call in, please do so. Share your thoughts with us if you want. The number is, as you will know, 01274 214 299. We'd love to hear what you have, anything you might want to say, or ask Paul or Alison any particular question in relation to policing and how, in your view, policing either is being done or not done, or how it can be improved. And I'm sure both of them will welcome that. I mean, coming back, Paul, obviously, one of the things we've learned over the last few years is restorative justice. That that is starting to play a slightly more increasing role in tackling issues around hate crime and other crimes as well. But it's not used as prominently as would like to use. I've just been told we're coming to our break. But restorative justice has obviously shown that it has better outcomes for the victims in some cases compared to in others. So when we come back, can we talk about restorative justice? And Alison, we can talk about, as you say, stop and search, but also the third sector.
And you can talk about restorative justice, because I can say something about that.
Yeah, I'm sure you could spend a whole hour on it, I'm sure. We're going to a break now. I hope you found the first part of the program interesting and informative, that we could talk this subject for a very long time to come. Inshallah, don't go away. Make yourself a faluda or a cup of tea or coffee. We'll see you soon. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.